Dear church, let's talk about prepping to preach. Dear church, let's talk Holy Spirit, transformation, prayer.
6 days, right?
And if you love me, you will keep my commandments.
Our culture wants to define you by your sexuality. We know that our identity is now Christ.
Hello and welcome to the Dear Church Podcast. I'm your host, Chris McCurley. As always, I'm joined today by Richard Sutton, all the way from Idaho. Richard, thank you so much for being on today.
It's good to be with you this morning.
Absolutely. You've been in Meridian, Idaho for how long now?
Been there for 23 years, going on 24.
Wow. And so,
Yeah.
and Meridian, for those who don't know their Idaho geography, just outside of Boise, is that right?
Yeah, we're about 10 miles from Boise, not very far.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I had the opportunity to be up there a couple of years ago. One of my favorite trips I've ever made, to go up there and preach. You're at the Linder Road Church of Christ, wonderful congregation, wonderful people. We actually have a member from Abilene, Texas, when I was there, that moved up there and is now leading singing, things like Mike Perkins and his family.
Yeah, he taught us a new song Sunday evening. He had a great song leader. Yeah, great family.
Great guy.
We're now too.
Yes, I'd heard that as well. And so I assume everything's going well at the Linder Road congregation?
Things that could not be going better other than the fact that our church building is too small for our congregation's growth. You know, we've outgrown the thing. And so it's a good problem to have, but nevertheless, it is a problem. But
so
we have a remote service that we put about 40 to 60 people in, as well as we fill up our auditorium pretty well. So it's busy.
Well, I know it was jam-packed the day I was there, and they said that was a normal Sunday, and that is fantastic. I appreciate the work that you do there, and you've got Clint on staff with you, and I know he's doing a great job, and your wonderful youth minister there as well, and just great people. And I look forward to being back there in the fall. So you have a lectureship every year. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, we have a lectureship every fall, like you said, in October, and we've been doing it since 2002. And this year we're doing it's called Truly, Truly. It's on the passages out of the Gospel of John on the truly statements that Jesus made. And we've had some great lectureships up here. We're kind of out of the way a little bit. You know, Idaho's a little bit out of the way of things. And so one of the larger congregations in the Northwest right now. And so we tried to provide that for people, but the folks have to come a long ways to get here for our lectureship. But it's a good lectureship. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is a great place. And are you an Idaho native? How did you get there?
No, I'm a little bit from nowhere. I was born in Oklahoma, but I've lived all over the country. My dad was in construction, so we moved a lot. And I began my ministry in Hayward, California, in the East Bay. And I was there about 7 years and decided I wanted to raise my children in a little bit more rural area. So we moved up to Caldwell, Idaho, and I was there about 11 years and left there, spent 4 years in Loveland and then back here. And we've been here ever since. And this will probably be the end of the end for me anyway. Hopefully.
Yeah.
I don't ever plan on retiring, but I'm thinking that I might go into a different kind of position here or preach for smaller congregations around the area. But that's my plan.
That's awesome. It is a great area. I see why you're there, why you've spent so much time there. We're talking in this series, Richard, about preparing to preach, and we're not focusing on the devising of the lesson. We've done that before in this series. We're talking about once you've put together the lesson, how do you get ready to preach it? And so that's where I really want to start, getting it from the page to your brain. And so once you've written the outline or written the sermon, talk about what you do in preparation to present it. What does that process look like?
Okay. Well, usually I'm done writing the sermon by Thursday afternoon. And that includes doing all the prep work, the writing of it. I dialogue my sermons. They're all in outline form, but I dialogue in between the major points and subpoints and so forth. I also do a PowerPoint presentation. So the PowerPoint is married to the sermon itself. And so what happens after I'm done on Thursday, writing the sermons, Friday is another prep day for other sermons and the class that I teach as well. But generally what happens with me on Saturday night or Saturday evening, that's when my day off ends. It ends. I have a day off on Saturday. It ends at like 6:30. And from 6:30 to 11:30, 12 o'clock, I sit in my chair with my notes in my lap, my computer in my lap with a PowerPoint opened up. And I go over the material over and over and over and over again. I memorize it, in other words. So that once I get to preach it on Sunday morning, I can make sure I have eye contact with the congregation and are not glued to my notes. Now, my notes will be in the pulpit with me, but I seldom ever look at them. The only time I might look at them is if I'm reading a poem or a story or something that I need I need some memory, some reminders for my memory. Other than that, I'm pretty well free of my notes, and I use mostly the PowerPoint as notes for myself. But mostly what I'm doing on Saturday evenings is I'm just memorizing it, until I get really familiar. So at the beginning of the evening, yeah, I know the sermon, but it's not smooth. It's a little bit jerky. And as I go through the evening, it gets smoother. Pretty soon, it's pretty easy for me. I know it really super well. My own problem is I go to bed and I preach it all night, over and over.
So you don't get a lot of sleep on Saturday night.
Well, probably like most preachers, we kind of get in our heads that we just can't get it out once we get going.
Yeah.
But that's what I do. Is I pretty well memorize the sermon, and pretty much will stay with the dialogue pretty well. I might change some things up in it, but when you do it like that, and if you hand out sermon notes, and if you do a PowerPoint presentation, you're pretty well stuck with having to deal with what you've got in front of you, so that the congregation can follow you.
So you're doing this in your recliner. You're not standing up in front of a mirror. You're not going to the empty church building and getting behind the pulpit and practicing. You're just sitting down with it in your recliner for as long as it takes.
Yeah. I've been doing this for like 45 years now. And so at the beginning of my ministry, I would probably do that. I'd probably stand up and stand in front of a mirror. I get distracted looking at myself, number one, if I stand in front of a mirror. And I'm more concerned about what I look like than what I'm supposed to be saying. And in the early years, I would go down to the church building on like a Saturday evening or something like that, and I would go through the sermon with an empty audience, which that's what we did in the COVID years. We spent a lot of time in our empty buildings preaching sermons. But I would do that. But I've been doing this so long now that I don't really generally do that. At the beginning, when I was memorizing the sermon, I would put, after every move on the PowerPoint, I'd put PP beside it. I don't even do that now. I just know where the moves are and when I'm supposed to push a button. And I do my own button pushing for my sermons and PowerPoint, but I don't get up and stand up and do it. I just basically just go over it, so I'm comfortable with it from my chair. Yeah.
Yeah. You said you take your notes with you. One of my questions that I've been asking preachers in this series is, do you use notes? And you've answered that question already. But, I've noticed that when you preach, you are very much engaged with the congregation, and you even get away from the pulpit where your notes would be. Right. I guess you're kind of like a lot of us in that there may be a point where you kind of lock up a little bit, or you have to return to them. But, I hear you saying that they're just basically a safety net just in case you need them.
Yeah, that's what they are. They're a safety net. If I get lost somewhere, or there's been times, when you've been preaching and the PowerPoint freezes up or goes away. But like I said, I've memorized it so well that I usually don't use the notes even then. I'll just tell them, just turn this thing off, and the PowerPoint's for you, mostly not for me. And I just go on, so. Yeah. I don't trust that PowerPoint completely.
No, technology is great when it works, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's important for young preachers to hear what you said, is that you memorize, and we've mentioned in this podcast series several times that there's more than one way to skin this cat. So that's why we have a variety of guys on, because there's different ways to do things. Right. And we have made the comment that notes are not bad. They're not the devil. So it's okay to have notes. But we have also made the point, especially, for young guys starting out, do your best not to read everything. Connect with your audience. Make sure that you're, especially with an illustration, or when you're really hitting a point, You want to be able to look at your audience
Mhm.
and relate to them. And you do that very well, which is the reason why I wanted to have you, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on today. Talk about that when you're going through your notes and when you're rehearsing the sermon. Are you thinking about, okay, this is where I'm going to be standing. This is what I want to gesture. This is how, this is where I want to look. Are you thinking about those things, or is it just natural?
I don't think about those things. I remember when I was in school, the instructors would say, when you're making a point and you're using hand gestures, you don't want to say there's power in the blood. You want to emphasize there's power in the blood. But I use kind of a conversational type preaching. I don't have a preacher tone, so I just kind of conversation. I just kind of talk to the congregation. I like to look at them. I like to see what their faces. I can tell when I'm losing my audience, or when I'm not resonating, or when a illustration falls flat, or maybe when the point is not getting across. Generally what I try to do is that I try to do point by point, and I try to not overuse the point. In other words, I try to make the point, and I think that I said what I've got to say, and then I want to move on. And so I watch the audience to see how they're responding. Linder Road's a good congregation for respond. These respond to all the emotions. They laugh when they're supposed to laugh. They cry when they're supposed to cry. Shake their heads in the right ways. And so that's why I like to look at the audience. Now, like you said, I'm not opposed to using notes. Some guys can do that and get away with it really well. I get lost when I try to read my notes, when I try to stay with everything that is there. So there's times when I'll go back to the pulpit and I'll just move my pages aside to the point where I know. In fact, I usually know this is an area that this is a point in the notes where I might be a little bit, I may not be able to have as good a recall. So I know I know it's 3 pages deep, or 2 pages deep, or 4 pages deep, and I just go to it. And last Sunday when I did a lesson for mothers, I had an illustration about a God creating a woman. Well, it was a lengthy thing, and so I decided, I'm not going to try to memorize that. I'm just going to read that. And so I went back to my notes and went 3 pages down, and there it was, and I read it. But
you just know your stuff really, really well before you get up there. That's the key, right?
Yeah. But, for full disclosure, my PowerPoint's my notes. I use it because in our auditorium, we have the PowerPoint that is behind me, but we have a screen that is in front of me, and it's a big screen. So I'm able to see it. At least I know where I'm moving. When I made a transition or I've made a move, I'm able to see it. And I had that reminder that is there. Now, several years ago, I preached that affirming the faith, and I asked Kim Lewis, who's the minister there at North MacArthur, I said, "You have a screen, a PowerPoint screen?" "Yeah." "Okay, great." So when I use a PowerPoint, I'll be able to know what's going on. And so they had big screens that they use on their walls to the right and left of the pulpit at North MacArthur. But they have a screen in the back that's like a 50-inch screen. You can't even see what's on it. All you can see is
that's true.
You only see when it moves. So if you were stuck to your PowerPoint alone, well, you're hosed. You're done, because
that's true.
You can't see it. And so you find yourself kind of glancing to your left and right, to see what you just said, So on that, I remember at that particular sermon, I had COVID. I didn't even know it, but I had COVID and my brain was fuzzy and I couldn't think clearly. And I kept thinking, why am I feeling so fuzzy? My memory is just not there, and it made me extremely nervous. And so I got home. My wife said, "How did it go?" I said, "It's the worst sermon I ever preached." And but it was, some of it I think was the effect that I got there. I thought, okay, I'll have a screen. It's a big congregation. They probably have screens. Well, Tim, I don't use his notes as much, PowerPoint as much. He uses a few slides, and I use quite a few. The reason why I use PowerPoint for me is that I know there's some downside to it. I know the downside to PowerPoint is that from guys who really get into this, is they'll say, well, the congregation is too busy looking at the screen and not enough looking at you. And I think there's some danger in that. Okay. And that's why I kind of move around,
Sure.
So that, because people are used to 15-minute sound bites from TV. And so I move around a little bit simply because of that. And because I'll move to the right, I'll move to the left. I just kind of time myself when I want to do that. And but I use those notes to a recall. I guess the danger to it is that you might lose that a little bit. But if they can hear me, see me, and then up behind me they see it, and sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. The downside to that is that if you're not careful, you can lose some ability in terms of being word crafting sermons or word crafting different kinds of things where you get lazy and you allow a picture to do all the word crafting for you. So I think you need to be able to draw pictures with illustrations without just the picture behind you. But sometimes a picture says 1,000 words better than maybe me trying to word craft something. So that's the danger of it, is that you could get lazy, and that you could, in terms of wording things, you may not be as good at. But I know that, so I try to remind myself to, try to explain things in ways that people can get it and understand. So I use it for that. If you give out hand notes, we quit doing that during COVID because everybody's worried how you're going to spread this stuff. But I used to do handout with blanks on it, so I was able to reinforce they heard the sermon, they're able to see the sermon, they're able to read the sermon, and they're able to write in the sermon. So you reinforce 4 or 5 different kinds of memory things, so the message goes away with them. Because what did they say, that people only hear like 10 or 15% or remember 10 or 15% of your lesson? Yeah. And so that's why I like to preach with a homiletical style, that harmonizes. So there's one point I want them to walk away with, but I'm going to go at it from 3 different directions.
Right. And I like that.
And so that they can remember, here are 3 points. They can see when I am making a major point. They can hear what the transitional sentence is that leads me to that next point, so that they can easily follow me. And that helps the congregation to stay with you longer than if you have a beginning and an end and they're not sure what happened in the middle.
Yeah, for sure. Richard, you said a lot of things there that are great. I want to pick up on one thing, and that is when you don't use notes as much, I think there's a tendency, or perhaps a danger, I should say, of repeating yourself and preaching the same sermon 3 times in that lesson, or rambling, or getting off track. I know for me, notes focus me, but I'm like you. I try to memorize most of it, but it is easy to kind of start chasing rabbits or getting off track. When a young bee starts to learn her role in the beehive, she's not sure what to think, but her older siblings are there to help her understand how she fits in, how it is all part of God's wonderful design. In each Ruby's Happy Hive book, Ruby learns important values and is encouraged to always do what is right. Wonderfully illustrated in full color, this series is an engaging way to teach your children or grandchildren about bees, but more importantly, about the values of helpfulness, truthfulness, and being a good steward. Search for Ruby's Happy Hive by Heidi Fowler on Amazon and get your copies today. How do you thwart that danger? Is that something that just comes in the memorization process? You've got it in your mind. This is how it's going to go. This is how it's going to flow, and I'm not going to waver from that whatsoever.
I'm pretty much like that. I'm pretty much stay right with my notes and stay with the notes and the PowerPoint. Like I said, the PowerPoint, it sticks you, so you can't very often.
True.
I mean, you got to deal with
that's true.
Are there, which means you have to be succinct in getting your points across and then move it on. So. I know I've told younger preachers is that don't keep making your same point over and over and over again. Move on unless you're just not sure that you made your point, But be convinced that you've made your point, you've said what you needed to say, and then move off of it. Move on to the next.
Yeah, that's good advice.
And I know with preaching they'll say you need to tell the congregation what you're going to say. Then you need to say, and then you need to repeat it. Well, I can't think you can do that, but you need to be more subtle than that. So they don't know that they're being told the same thing over and over again.
Right.
And memorizing helps you to do that. And now my memory is not as good probably as it was when I was a younger man. I'm 70 years old now, so I have senior moments where I will draw a blank on a vocabulary word, and I'll have to search through my mind and try to find some synonym to fill that spot. Because I don't want to end up being like some presidents that said, "Oh, never mind," or whatever.
Right. I understand. Hey, do you evaluate yourself when you're done? I mean, when you finish, do you go back like some suggest and watch yourself to clean it up, or do you, ask your wife, or do you ask a trusted friend in the congregation or an elder, hey, how did I do? What could I have changed? What could I have done better? Or is it just self-reflection and that's about it?
Well, it's a lot of it's self-reflection. I look at, how did the congregation respond to the message?
Yeah.
Were they, I try to be done in a succinct period of time so I don't end up getting mamas in trouble, having to take children out to discipline them,
Yeah.
So, but I try to read the audience, and that's one of the reasons why I do watch the audience is because, for instance, I'll use names of people that are sit clear on the back pews because I want them to know I know they're there. So I try to communicate to them, and I can tell whether they're listening or not, or how they are responding to the words, or whether they become disinterested. If you watch the audience, you can usually tell that pretty well. Teenagers are a great barometer for that, because our teenagers don't sit right up front, and you can tell whether you got those guys in hand or not, because they'll let you know because they'll be doing their phones or talking among themselves. So I kind of watch the congregation. In the COVID years, when we went through COVID for those, 2 years or so, that forced us as preachers to have to watch ourselves.
Yeah.
I mean, it made us do that, because we were.
That's torture.
Yeah, I was recording, when that thing first started to happen, we didn't have any plans to address that. So I was on my own. I was doing lessons in my backyard. I set up an iPad, and I was recording lessons in my backyard. And at the beginning, when I would record the lessons, my wife would record it. I'd put some notes out in front of me so I could kind of see where I was going with the thing. But you could see yourself afterwards. When you would watch it, you would see yourself. And at the beginning, you probably went through this. You would preach the sermon, and then you'd get going along somewhere, and you'd have something where you'd have a glitch, and so you'd stop and say, "Okay, we got to start over." And then I learned, well, no, they've been recording me here forever. And there was no stopping. There was no stopping if they had a glitch or forgot. Right. You just powered through it, And so there wasn't any, engineer sitting there going, go or don't go, Right. And so, but in those years, we learned to watch ourselves, and I was able to identify tics. I could identify that I was wiggling my shoulder a certain way. Or touching my face in a certain way. And those things are not bad things, but if you can knock out as many things you can that are distracting.
Yes.
That the audience can see that they're just tics, and you don't want to get into a place where you have your teenagers sitting there and they're taking notes, and their notes are how many times you went, or how many times you wiggled your shoulder, or how many times you did something, So when I do watch myself, I try to see if I can identify things in there that is out of place, or whether I look sloppy, or whether I look too casual, or whether I look like I'm being a smart aleck, and try to remove those things, because for me, I don't want me as a messenger to get in the way of the message.
No doubt.
And so whatever I can do with my body or with little habits, if I can get those out, that helps. And so if you go back, and I don't do it all the time, but certainly during the COVID years, I had to watch it almost weekly of what you were doing, whether it was in your office doing something, or in your living room, or in your dining room, or in the backyard. You had to watch yourself, and you were able to learn a lot of things about yourself, and, about how to get us out of sentences, and all those fillers, remove those. And that's a great way to do that. And so even today, every once in a while, I'll watch a sermon that I preached, and I'll evaluate it and say, okay, I need to do this, or I need to do that, but you have to, you can get a lot of bad habits in 45 years of preaching.
Yeah, you do. I mean, for 25, I can tell you, it doesn't take 45. I can do it in 25.
Yeah.
How do you evaluate whether it was a good sermon or not? You've mentioned a few times now, you like to look at the audience and respond and see how they are responding. I've mentioned, and if you haven't listened or watched Richard, go on, the Linder Road website and watch some sermons. But you do a very good job of being conversational and just, talking to the people and making eye contact. Is that how you gauge the success of the sermon? If you feel like the people were, showing the good body language and responding?
Yeah, that's some of it. My wife is a great critiquer. she'll critique me when I haven't done this in some years, but there were some years when I was in Caldwell, especially. I had a good friend over there, and I've even done some here. I'll pick a person that I think is a good mentor or is a good listener, and I'll give them permission to critique me.
Yes.
I'll tell them, are you hearing any grammatical mistakes that I'm making? Do you see those things? Am I repeating some things too much? And I'll ask them to critique me. And so this man that I had over in Caldwell, we'd be out fishing or doing something like that. And he'd say, Richard, he goes, I was thinking about something that you said the other day in your sermon. And you said that, people that do this. And he goes, people are not that's, they're who and whose and whom's, and that's our thing, And so,
yes.
So for a grammarian who sits in the pew, that thing is like nails on a chalkboard.
I'm a nightmare to a grammarian.
Yeah, he drives them nuts. So I'm conscious of that, and so over the years, I've had people do grammatical checks on me, and I grew up watching cowboy shows. With Gunsmoke and those kind of things where they use the worst grammar in the world. But you think it's the best grammar because that's what you were raised on. And so then you try to carry that into a pulpit, and now you got to correct things. And so that was some of the things that I'd use different men to critique me, and I'd give them permission to do so.
That's that's good advice.
Anyway, but
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm just like, some people will critique you anyway. Or going to,
whether you want it or not.
Yeah. But as I've got older, I don't get so much of that, and so I give people permission to critique or to give me an idea. Or most Sunday I'll ask my wife, well, how did you think that went this morning? Or was I clear? Was I understandable? And she'll be pretty honest with me. She's prejudiced, but she tries to be honest with me. Sure. And I've got 3 daughters over here too, and I'll ask them sometimes, what do you think? And
that's great that you have your family there and that you can confide in them about this. And yeah, that's really neat. Hey, Richard, if you were to boil all this down and maybe give 2 or 3 pointers to young preachers starting out, just overall, not even about the topic we're talking about, just overall, what advice would you give them?
After you've preached for a long time, and you've probably experienced this, and I think probably almost all preachers have, you'll go through periods where you have dry times, when your creative juices just don't go. It could be something that's going on in your life or something that's going on in the congregation where your mind's going a different direction and you're not creative. And a lot of guys are really topic heavy preachers. They preach lots of topical sermons, and I'm not against topical sermons. I use them. Okay. But topical sermons depend on either a situation that you're wanting specifically to address, or you've come across something in terms of your experience that really excites you or really revs you up, that you really get excited about, that you think will resonate with not only with the audience, but with yourself, and you're excited about that. But there are times in your life that you don't feel that way in preaching. Yeah. I mean, when you're doing a year's worth of sermons, and say if you're in a smaller congregation and you're doing Sunday morning and Sunday evening and Wednesday evening and Sunday morning Bible class and ladies Bible class, that's a lot of information to throw out. That's a ton of information. If you're like me, I do a Sunday morning Bible class now. I do a Sunday morning sermon, and I have to do a Sunday evening sermon. Okay, so that's what in a year's time you'll do 50 different lessons, 100 different lessons. That's a lot of lessons. And so you're going to go through dry times. And so what I've found that has saved me in my preaching is expository preaching. Mm-hmm. Expository preaching, you don't have to have revved up juices to get that going. You just preach the text and be honest with the text. And by the way, I think it's also where your congregation learns the most Bible. They learn a lot of topics, but they'll learn a lot of Bible through expository preaching. and they'll say things that you don't see. You'll go through an exposition of a section of scripture and you'll see things, but as you're going through it, you'll be triggering their minds as well, and they'll come up with things that you didn't think about, but that's found within that text itself. But I think one is it helps you you don't have to be, I'm not saying you shouldn't be creative, but you don't have to be just rawly creative. The creation is right there in the text itself for it to do, and you just have to identify the points in the application. Yeah. The other thing I think is important in preaching is application. We want to stay true to the word, and I think that's one way of gauging whether you did your job or not. Were you true to the word? Did you understand the word when you stepped out of the pulpit? Are they going to be make an application to it? What's the old saying? We live in we take a never-changing gospel to a never-changing world. Yeah. So the world is constantly changing around us, and as I look at our world around us, since I started in 81 and now moving up to 2025, our world has changed a lot, societally speaking, morality speaking, politics speaking. Just everything has changed. Well, somehow you got to take the word that is timeless and make it fit, or make it fit in an applicational way where they can take that, and because the word is timeless, but you have to be able to bring it up to date so that the people it can resonate with them, so that when they walk out of the auditorium, they can take something with them.
For sure. Yeah. Great advice, Richard. And hey, thanks again for taking time out of your schedule to be with us today. I really appreciate all that you do and for sharing it with us.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for the work that you're doing. I mean, the work you're doing is absolutely fabulous. And the podcasts, I'll watch them from time to time, and they're fabulous as well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that very much. And I want to tell our viewers and listeners, I appreciate you tuning in today. And if you have a question about today's episode, you can email me at chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. And if you have a specific question for Richard, we'll make sure that we forward it on to him. I'm sure he'll be able to answer any questions that you might have. And just thank everyone for tuning in. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.